Turning now to the investigation into a deadly plane crash in Orange County that exposed the mysterious double life of the pilot who died. And it has played out like a wild movie plot. The crash happened back in February on Super Bowl Sunday. A Cessna airplane went down in a Yorba Linda neighborhood shortly after taking off from Fullerton Municipal Airport. A wing that held a fuel tank hit a house, killing the pilot, Antonio Pastini, and 4 others as they waited to watch the Super Bowl inside that home. 2 others suffered serious burns. As investigators sifted through the wreckage, they discovered a police badge belonging to a retired Chicago cop. It was a key piece of evidence that unraveled the pilot's complicated and questionable past. LA Times reporter Matt Ormseth has been following the story closely. He joins us now to talk about it. Oh, hi, Matt. Thanks for coming by. This is a whopper, isn't it? Tell us about this badge. That's where the investigation started.
Yeah, so in Tony Pastini's life story, the badge was kind of the punctuation on his career as a Chicago cop. He told people he retired as a detective sergeant, and he would show them the badge, and that kind of sealed the story. But when he crashed in Yorba Linda and investigators found the badge, they identified him as a cop, and it surprised nobody except for the Chicago police, really, who said, you know, we have no record of this guy ever being a cop in Chicago.
And so what was the next step to unraveling this past?
Well, after that, we found out that he had 2 other names. So then we thought, oh, well, maybe, you know, he was a cop under these other 2 names. And we asked them, and they said, no, you know, nobody by those other 2 names was a cop. We asked the police union. We asked the Association of Retired Police Officers, and they all said no. And from there, we had a big mystery on our hands. You know, if he said he spent 17 years as a cop and he wasn't a cop, then what was he doing for those 17 years? And that's kind of where the story started.
So 2 completely different identities. One, he's a cop. In the other identity, he's also sort of acting like he's kind of a crook and a criminal, and like 2 dual personalities.
Yeah, I mean, he actually had three different names, but he was using 2 simultaneously. And you know, that's another question that we didn't really answer. You know, why did he have these 2 personalities at the same time?
He also had ex-wives, 4 ex-wives, 1 current wife.
Yep.
What'd you learn from them?
Well, one of the divorces back in 2001 was really the kind of foundation of the story. That ex-wife, who now lives in Georgia, hints at some reasons why he kept these different identities. She thought he was doing it to hide money from all of his different wives, because he had quite a few. And she also hints at his inability to get liquor licenses because she said he had some trouble with the law. And from what we uncovered, we think it was something to do with gambling. He was getting in trouble with the state gambling regulators.
He ended up living in Nevada and opening a chain of delis. And interestingly, under the name of Antonio Pastini, right, the cop identity.
Yep.
And he ends up courting a clientele that's mainly law enforcement, like giving them half-price meals for their families and even doing fundraisers?
Yeah, I mean, we would find these clips in the Reno and Sparks newspapers where, you know, a cop who got mailed a letter bomb, he would have a big fundraiser and donate all the proceeds. You know, cops would show up and they'd dress up in his hot dog costumes and stand out on the corners. And I mean, we did talk to a lot of ex-Reno cops, and they said, yeah, you know, we thought he was a stand-up guy. We got along with him because he had these war stories, you know, like ours, and I mean, they're all totally shocked from what they've told us.
They loved him, all these people that were interviewed about him. They really did think he was just the salt of the earth, great old retired cop.
Yeah.
And he liked being the guy that flew his friends around. Even one guy who owned the notorious brothel, the Bunny Ranch, who recently passed away. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so from what we've understood, he met Dennis Hoff in the 90s, which was before he opened his brothels or bordellos. And they became fast friends. Dennis Hoff liked eating at his restaurants, eventually opened up a sushi restaurant that Dennis Hoff ate at like twice a week. And he also was kind of Dennis Hoff's personal pilot. He would fly some women who worked at his brothels too, along with the brothel's maintenance man. And then when Dennis Hoff was campaigning for a state assembly seat, Pastini was his pilot. He'd fly him to different campaign stops.
A colorful life, to say
Yeah.
the least, right? Now, he'd been on the FAA's radar before, quite literally. Tell us about those.
Yeah, so at first it wasn't immediately obvious that he'd been, because he got in trouble twice under his birth name, which was Jordan Isaacson. So when Antonio Pastini crashed, the FAA had said, you know, we never had any run-ins with this guy. But we had found these records kept by the Library of Congress that said a Jordan Isaacson was disciplined, and we thought that that was the same guy. And it turns out it was. He was flying from Las Vegas back to Long Beach. And later we found out he liked to fly to Vegas just for a few hours to gamble and eat and then come back. So it might have been one of those jaunts. And he was coming back and flew into some really nasty weather. And he wasn't instrument rated, which means that you can fly an airplane, you know, just with the plane's instruments, even if it's zero visibility. But he told air control he was, made this pretty dangerous flight, and lost his license for 120 days. And then about 3 years later, he got in trouble again with the FAA because his plane was like behind on inspections. It was leaking, the brake was leaking fluid, and a judge said it was unairworthy.
So the investigation is ongoing because the FAA has not yet, or the NTSB not identified the cause of the crash. So what happens next?
Well, one thing that they did do was they put out an early report about 2 weeks ago saying, I mean, it doesn't say conclusively what caused the crash, but it did say that when he was taking off, he was warned that there was bad weather over Yorba Linda, and he flew into it regardless. But they're going to take anywhere between, you know, a year to 18 months to figure out what exactly went wrong, and they're reconstructing the plane out in a lab in Phoenix, apparently.
Wow, and now that you know about these other ex-wives, you'll probably be reconstructing his life a little more thoroughly too, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the reasons why we wanted to do this story, because the NTSB, they said that they're not really interested in his backstory. They're just interested in how the plane crashed. But, I mean, obviously we were interested in
Yes,
the pilot
it is
himself.
like a movie. Matt, thanks
Yeah.
so much for coming by. It's nice to have you here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And Matt's going to continue to follow the investigation into the pilot as well as the cause of the crash. And you can look for his reporting at latimes.com.